All right, guys, week 17 is now in the books, wrapped up in a way that no one could have imagined or would have ever wanted for Damar Hamlin in the Bills and the Bengals game. But now that we have some clarity on what the game is going forward and obviously on Damar's health, I feel here that it's appropriate to come back in, wrap up the season. We'll talk about studs, duds, and obviously the most important thing, plans for this channel going forward, giving some updates, reviewing some headlines, the whole shebang that we normally do here. So a little bit more clarity once we get to the other side of this intro. Welcome back into TwinTakes Fantasy Football, and unfortunately, obviously not the same exuberance that I normally start out each show with, obviously in response to the Damar Hamlin injury. And of course, the big elephant in the room here is that this podcast is coming out 3 days post when it normally should have come out. Myself and the other talking heads in the industry have obviously taken a break from talking about fantasy football out of respect for the Damar Hamlin situation. Didn't feel right to talk about celebrations and championships and all the great things that happened with that kind of hanging over our heads. However, as of today, we have gotten some great news, some really, really positive updates from Damar Hamlin, and I felt it was the right time to finally wrap up week 17, talk about what I wanted to talk about in a crazy championship weekend. So without further ado, we will now, 3 days post, talk about week 17. And of course, I know everyone is emotionally exhausted by the Damar Hamlin situation, but we will address it quickly because it would not be in my reporting duty to ignore that very glaring fact of what happened in the Bills-Bengals game Monday night. Obviously, the first thing to be said, it was such a freak and bizarre play. There's nothing T. Higgins did wrong. It was beyond normal of a hit. So I know the prevailing theory going around is commotiocartosis. A very, very, very rare condition in which a cardiac event can be triggered by a very hard impact to the chest area, but obviously we won't have any clarity to what actually caused the injury until the doctors come out. But again, why we're actually here doing this podcast is because we have some very, very positive updates on the Damar Hamlin situation. He was up, he was active, he was neurologically intact, which is incredibly, incredibly important. He was responsive, had communicated with the doctors via a writing board because he still has the tube and is still trying to breathe. So the fact that he's able to communicate, able to, move his extremities, squeeze the hand of his loved ones is obviously very, very positive news. And their next steps forward are just to get him breathing on his own, but it's still going to be a long road to recovery. So obviously thoughts and prayers are with Damar Hamlin at this time. Again, the small silver lining is the good that the community, especially the fantasy community, can do in a situation like this where Damar's charity, the Chasing M's Foundation, went from trying to reach a goal of $2,500 to being well over $17.3 million at the time of this recording. And I know a lot of fantasy communities, mine included, have taken the winnings of the league and donated them to that charity as it felt appropriate, showing that, in a community that can be toxic at sometimes, I will admit that there is some good to be taken from the situation. So again, we'll continue to monitor that. But again, also, we saw all the videos coming out of Bill's practice today. It seems like they're back to practicing. They're back to, the good news has resounded well with them. We saw some smiles and some, obviously the positive news spreads like wildfire. So, hopefully we can get some sense of normalcy going into week 18 as the playoffs come in. And we'll talk about the fantasy implications, as today we just got handed down the notification that the Bills-Bengals game will not reconvene. They won't play out. It's going to be considered a no contest. There will be implications for the playoffs down the road, but that's not what we're concerned about here. We're concerned about how does this impact a lot of fantasy championship, because they did involve in week 17, because it was two high-powered offenses, two really, really fantasy relevant teams in the Bills and the Bengals. A lot of people had players. Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Dawson Knox, Devin Singletary, Isaiah McKenzie probably in some deeper leagues, James Cook in some deeper leagues. And then on the Bengals side, you have Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, Joe Mixon, Joe Burrow, maybe someone's trying to play a Hayden Hurst in a tight end sticky situation. So here's how I did it. Thankfully, in most of the leagues that I managed, it was kind of a clear-cut winner by the time Monday night rolled around. So most of the championships, there was a 90% factor of who was going to be winning, and it just really didn't seem like there was it already seemed like the winner had been decided before that Monday night game, barring some wild, insane day, which isn't unprecedented by Mike Evans' performance this weekend. But at that point, we got together, we discussed it, we decided we'll just call it because the games are so lopsided. And I know a lot of leagues, Sleeper had come out. Obviously, I work closely with Sleeper, so I get those updates. And they had said that if the Bills-Bengals game had been resumed, then there would be an option to recalculate the Week 17 scores based on the resumed Bills-Bengals games. But as we know now, it's going to be called a no contest. So this is, I think, the fairest way to call it, if it wasn't clear and obvious who the winner was taking whatever players were impacted, whether it was Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and then letting them play out Week 18. So you take whatever they scored in Week 18 and retroactively apply it to your Week 17 score. I know it's not a perfect one-to-one comparison as matchups are different, but that is just the way I think would be most fair, is if it was a tight matchup and you can't come to an agreement on who should be the champion, that's how you do it. You let the scores in Week 7, and then you take your commissioner tools and you retroactively apply it to the games. Obviously, if it comes down to a situation where the Bengals aren't playing for something and they pull a lot of their starters, because obviously with Week 18, sometimes teams aren't playing for anything. Obviously, I think the Bills and the Bengals, they are playing for playoff positions. So at this point in time, it looks like, all of your players will be actively playing. But if it comes out that there's a report that they don't want to play or they're going to rest starters, then I would say, listen, if you have a Stephon Diggs, you can choose either Stephon Diggs to play in Week 18, or you can pick another wide receiver. Let's say your wide receiver core, just randomly, you say if Stephon Diggs, Jalen Waddle, CeeDee Lamb, and Jahan Dotson, and you played Stephon Diggs and Jalen Waddle in your starters, and you flexed CeeDee Lamb, and Jahan Dotson was on your bench. So going to Week 18, you can say, okay, either I will pick Jahan Dotson to play, or I'll pick Stephon Diggs to play. One of the guys that's not already contributing to your current score for Week 17, and then whatever score they're in Week 18, you retroactively apply that score, and then you determine the championship that way. I think that is probably the most fair and equitable way to determine your fantasy championships. So with that elephant in the room out of the way, let's move on to some other headlines, which is obviously Mike Evans, a big day. Absolutely insane. Over 200 yards, 3 touchdowns, put up 43.7 fantasy points on the day. Just absolutely ridiculous. And a guy that was a sleeper all year, a Bucs offense that was completely dormant for most of the season. But the thing is, we saw a lot of traction to predict this. We saw a lot of deep targets. There was that major drop by Mike Evans a couple weeks ago. He's been having those end zone targets, and Brady has underthrown a couple of them. And that's obviously a byproduct of when the offense struggles. Typically, the quarterback second guesses and questions his throws. So he wasn't throwing those. Brady wasn't having those same throws and passes with the same confidence and dexterity that he normally does, just because of how inept the offense was being. But, against a pretty woeful Commanders team, looked like they finally got on the right page and really delivered a lot of fantasy championships across the league. Next headline is obviously Tua's health concerns. And this is obviously a season that's been marred by quite a bit of scandals when it comes to injury, and obviously Tua suffering his third concussion of the season. While the NFL won't admit it, we know it's his third concussion. Looks like he's going to be sat for the rest of the season due to his long-term health. And we saw that really adversely affect the wide receivers of the Dolphins offense. Tyreek didn't have a great day. Waddle had an absolutely abysmal day, and obviously Teddy Bridgewater broke his finger. And Skylar Thompson came in, and it looked like Skylar Thompson really didn't have too much in the tank as far as operating this offense, to the extent that neither Tua, not even the way Teddy B could facilitate it. So if you are playing a Week 18, I would be very, very wary, because Skylar Thompson is currently scheduled to get the start. Raiders organization's questions. I mean, it's a great story with Jarrett Stidham, but there's so much just turmoil surrounding the Raiders organization, and this is not something that they've been able to escape in the past years. The Henry Ruggs incident, not Colin Farrell, but they had another linebacker who was, he went on live media waving around a gun and was waived shortly after. It just seems like this Raiders organization cannot escape some sort of controversy or talking point. So it's something they have to address going forward. Obviously, it looks like Derek Carr has played his last snap in the black and silver uniform. that obviously leads a lot of questions surrounding Josh Jacobs' future with the organization and Devontae Adams' future with the organization. So it looks like there's going to be a lot of questions for them in the offseason. I just don't know how you can trust a Raider asset in Dynasty at this time. Moving on to our next headline was obviously the Eagles' massive letdown against the Saints. Gardner Minshew did not put up the same productivity that he had against the Cowboys 2 weeks ago. And I think a lot of this has to do with Lane Johnson going down to that injury. The offensive line was absolutely woeful for the Eagles all day. Gardner Minshew got sacked 6 times, was just under massive pressure and fire in the pocket all the time, could not complete, had that horrible interception to Marshawn Lattimore that was returned for a pick 6. And I think that's an underrated aspect. This is an Eagles offensive line that's been pretty healthy all year long and has been one of the best graded offensive lines per PFF every single week. So without their stalwart in Lane Johnson, I would be very, very concerned about the Eagles offense functioning the way it has been up to this point, especially with an offense that relies so heavily on the run game and one of the best run blockers in the league with Lane Johnson. So hopefully the Eagles can get him back in time for the playoffs. And obviously the last headline we'll talk about here is the Vikings collapse. This is a team that, Vegas has, they've been called overrated by a ton of talking heads. Vegas has had tons of lack of support in the Vikings' competency when it comes to playing football games, and it has showed in the lines that they set for these Vikings games. And I think as fantasy players of ourselves, we get really caught up by the offensive aspect where they have a Dalvin Cook, they have a Justin Jefferson, Kirk Cousins was playing competent football, Adam Thielen trading for TJ Hawkinson. It's like this offense looks unstoppable, one of the best offensive weapon rooms in the entire NFL. But we can't overlook how awful their defense was, and that's what happened against the Green Bay Packers organization this past Sunday. Despite having great names like a Harrison Smith, a Zadarius Smith, the Smith brothers, I know they're not actually brothers, and Danielle Hunter lining up for them, but it was just that this is a Vikings defense that just came on the same page, and it ends up in a blowout. This is their 3rd blowout of the season. They got blown up by the Eagles in week 2. They got blown up by the Cowboys a few weeks ago, and then they've just got blown out by the Packers. So very, very worrisome. I don't know how this Vikings team looks at the season, and probably one and done in the playoffs and calls it a success and runs it back the way it is next year. It looks like they're also an organization that has to have a lot of internal addressing, and I think this might be the last ride for Dalvin Cook, but we'll address a lot of that in the offseason content. So with that being said, we've quickly run down our headlines just because I like discussing headlines, but with the fantasy season over, we don't really have to talk about how it impacts the fantasy season anymore. It's more of just me reporting on what I see from the games watching. So with that being said, let's jump into our studs list. And we talked about it. The first one, very, very obvious, was Mike Evans. Just absolutely insane. Over 200 yards, 3 touchdowns. Finally that Tom Brady to Mike Evans connections found its way back home. The connection that we have seen in 2020 and 2021. And again, they've been trying it all year. It just hasn't been successful. And of course, they came together against a woeful secondary for the Commanders. And Mike Evans led home a ton of fantasy championships. And the guy throwing the ball actually did pretty well as well, with Tom Brady putting up 37.68 fantasy points. Obviously, the 3 touchdowns to Evans helped, and he snuck one in himself. So that extra 6 points from a rushing touchdown certainly was a nice cherry on the top to Tom Brady's day. Looks like they have locked up a playoff spot there in the Buccaneers in the NFC South. They have won the NFC South, and they'll be heading into the playoffs, seemingly having regained their stride to see if they can be a little bit of a disruptor, a little bit of an underdog, and pushing down in a weakened NFC conference. Number 3 got to talk about is Daniel Jones. Had an absolute massive day, obviously against the Colts, who's a team that's in absolute disarray at this moment. Again, Sam Ehlinger, whether Sam Ehlinger or Nick Foles, they've just absolutely pitiful, and the defense has been worse. Defense was actually pretty respectable last year, but it lost a lot of pieces to free agency as well as injury. And Daniel Jones had an incredible day, 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 passing touchdowns, ton of yardage on the ground, 36.1 points. Really, really solid end to the year for Daniel Jones. Looks like with this performance, locking them into the playoffs, he'll probably be back next year. No reason for Giants to consider drafting a quarterback in the upcoming draft now, will they? Well, they didn't pick up his 5th-year option, so we'll see if they bring him back, what kind of contract they hand out to him. And finally, Austin Eckler, a running back that's been just absolutely a stalwart of fantasy football. He loves fantasy football himself, so I guarantee you he had that in the back of his mind that Week 17 really meant a lot to his fantasy owners, and he put on a show, 30.1 points in the absolute dismantling of the Rams. Again, a vaunted Rams defense that has succumbed to injury, especially with Aaron Donald out for the rest of the season. Again, it is a tactic for the Rams where they go their stars. It's stars and studs tactic. But when your studs get injured, you got nothing left there. And Austin Eckler was able to run all over them, found the end zone twice, 30.1 yards, definitely delivered a lot of fantasy championships. Finally, Davante Adams, what a surprise performance from Davante himself. Had 2 major touchdowns, finishes with 30.6 fantasy points. Jarrett Stidham apparently is a competent quarterback. Obviously, Josh McDaniel had a affinity for him as he brought him over from his tenure with the New England Patriots. Especially not a performance that I think anyone was expecting against the number 1 ranked San Francisco 49ers defense, but he absolutely torched them. Davante definitely got his. And for the managers who were able to stick out the woeful 3 weeks of the initial fantasy playoffs of Davante Adams, you were certainly rewarded with your loyalty come Week 17. So let's talk about some honorable mentions here. Christian McCaffrey, 28.3 points. Again, this has been the recipe for success for the 49ers all year. You have a quarterback that's, he's not the driver of the offense. He's not like the hero of the offense. He's just there to be a facilitator of the offense. And with Kyle Shanahan, we know how much he loves this run game. Obviously, Brock Purdy is averaging about 16 passes per game, so we know a lot of work is going to go through the running back, especially with Christian McCaffrey with Elijah Mitchell still on the sidelines. He's being activated from IR, but obviously not for this game. And he's just one of those really dynamic running backs, and he was absolutely able to take advantage of that pathetic Raiders defense. Jamal Williams, another great performance he's been missing. If you started Jamal Williams this week, props to you because it's been a really rough go of it with Jamal. But apparently the narrative was that he needed 150 yards in order to gain a pretty big bonus on his contract. And obviously being an emotional leader of the team, they wanted to get it done for him. They gave him a lot of work this game. Got him in the end zone, 22.2 points. Absolutely amazing. Najee Harris finishes with 21.3 points. He has been so good since the bye week. He's been the running back 6 for fantasy since their bye. Kind of giving credit that a lot of people said he was washed. He wasn't as explosive. He was an older running back for being a sophomore. But it looks like there could have been some credit to the fact that he had that foot injury in preseason. That was really hampering him, and as the season got on and as his health got better, he found that spurt. He got more involved in the passing game with Kenny Pickett, so it really kind of gives a lot of owners with Najee Harris some confidence going forward, and I'm sure he'll be another first-round pick come next year. Amari Cooper finally had his breakout game with Deshaun Watson under center. Only had 3 passes, but took them for touchdowns and ends up with 24.0 points. An absolutely amazing game from Amari Cooper. Devonta Smith, and an otherwise unremarkable day for the Philadelphia Eagles and a pathetic loss to the Saints. Devonta seems to be the favorite target for Gardner Minshew. When there's a change of quarterbacks, there's obviously a change in preferences and who they look for and what reads they are comfortable with. And when Gardner Minshew came in against the Dallas Cowboys, you saw him target Devonta Smith more than A.J. Brown, and he had more receptions than A.J. Brown. So it seems like Gardner really liked Devonta, and even in a bad performance, Devonta was able to finish with 16 fantasy points on 10 catches. Absolute monster game for Devonta. Josh Jacobs, again, a very surprise performance. Performed really, really well against this 49ers defense. They got up on the 49ers early, actually, which is very, very surprising. The Raiders did. So getting Josh Jacobs involved in the rush, in the running game, involved in the passing game, 17.5 points for probably one of the top 3 RBs for fantasy football. Just a great cap to his season. Travis Etienne, 21.5 points. Great breakout campaign for the sophomore running back who missed his rookie season with that Liz Frank injury. Obviously capping off a very strong season, 21.5 points. According to some metrics, he has the most rush yards over expected per a lot of betting lines. So it just means that he's been overperforming every single game this year. Obviously, just a fantastic talent, and it looks as the offense and Trevor Lawrence and Doug Peterson's run-heavy offense for the Jaguars continues to tick upwards. Travis Etienne will be a very, very fantasy-relevant asset for years to come. Cordell Patterson and Tyler Algier, the Atlanta Falcons running backs, both got it done. Cordero with 17.4 points, Tyler Algier with 16.0 points. This is Arthur Smith's game script, isn't it? Just run the ball as much as possible. Don't put too much pressure on the quarterback. Obviously, it comes at the very, very sad detriment to a lot of Drake London and Kyle Pitts owners. However, it'll be interesting to see how they revamp the running back room. If they keep Arthur Smith, a very popular landing spot for Bijan Robinson, and I can't imagine him getting 35 touches in this offense. It would absolutely be insane. But Tyler Algier, very, very great rookie campaign. I mean, he runs ferociously and been a big fan of his since the offseason, so very happy to see him finish this. DeAndre Swift, for those of you who, suffered through the midseason lulls, he has actually come on quite strong towards the end of the season. We've been calling for him as the RB1 since week 13 in that Lions offense, with the Lions now regaining their title as a very, very high-scoring offense. And DeAndre Swift just was absolutely incredible this week. 25.7 fantasy points, delivered a fantasy matchup if you survived that midseason lull. DJ Moore, again, we saw great performances from both DJ Moore and Sam Darnold. They've had a great connection ever since Sam Darnold came into the building, except for 1 week, but DJ Moore has been a very, very viable fantasy asset. They're going up against a Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense that is very susceptible to the pass, and I predicted that DJ Moore was going to be a top 24 wide receiver this week. We knew there's going to be a lot of utilization. He's basically the focal point of this offense, by far and away the best offensive playmaker when it comes to this Panthers offense, and it just lined up really well with the matchup that they had seen, and DJ Moore goes off for 20.7 points. Dalton Schultz, again, a game that a lot of people were very tepid when coming to starting their Cowboys in that Thursday night game because they thought it was going to be a blowout. Obviously, the Titans have anything to play for. They were starting Josh Dobbs, the guy they pulled off of a practice squad 10 days before that. They were arresting Derrick Henry. So it could have been a game that got out of hand really, really quickly, and all of your assets were not going to be pretty relevant. But if you had the stones to start Dalton Schultz, he's very talented tight end, and he found the end zone twice, as it ended up being a much closer game than previously anticipated. Joshua Dobbs came in, absolutely destroyed it from picking up the playbook, facilitating a very, very simplistic NFL-style offense, made some big-time throws, had a couple really bad drops by Austin Hooper. Austin Hooper had a really bad drop, and I believe it was Chigozie Okonkwo also had a really bad drop as well. And Treylon Burks also had a pretty bad drop. So it could have been a much better day for the Titans, but I think they put up a much better competitive game and gives them some faith going into this week's do-or-die game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Also, CeeDee Lamb had a fairly good game as well. I know for some of those people that, you get the bonus points going over 100 yards because this happened in our league. CeeDee was sitting at 99 yards. They throw him a quick screen pass at the end of the game just for pick up 1 yard to get him to triple digits when the game was basically pointless and out of hand. I mean, for the CeeDee Lamb managers, I know they're very happy, but for people playing them, it was just like, come on, like, why are you doing this? And then, of course, the bonus points for getting those certain yardage marks. Brandon Ayuk, incredible game. Obviously, a very, very high-scoring game for the 49ers and Las Vegas Raiders. So Brandon Ayuk finds the end zone. Obviously, he starts off pretty meagerly with a 1 yard touchdown reception, but then just goes off. Was the preferred target of Brock Purdy this week. We know that Brock Purdy doesn't have enough passing volume to sustain two assets. In the past couple of weeks, it has been George Kittle, but then it really shifted back to Brandon Ayuk this week. He put up a great game. A couple more we're going to talk about here in Rapid Studs section. A.J. Brown, just because he found the end zone, really saved his fantasy day, 17.7 points. Huge, big body threat, 1K, always open. He really is always open. He is just so damn good for the Philadelphia Eagles. Massive end zone threat, and obviously as they go down the stretch, you have to utilize him, and they brought him in and gave him $100 million for a reason. Raheem Mostert, again, up, down. He was a guy If you checked out the sleeper videos, a guy that I was actually rocking with in championship weekend because, it's been 4 years since he was a championship winner for a lot of people back in 2019. Obviously, with the injuries to Jeff Wilson Jr., Raheem Mostert comes back in, takes full ownership of that backfield, and especially when it comes down to Tua not throwing the ball, they're going to rely heavily on the running back. Raheem Mostert definitely delivered a lot of people some fantasy championships. Jerick McKinnon has been absolutely a monster for the Chiefs, really unlocked him in the past 4 games. The playoff darling of fantasy football. He's been the running back 1 over the past 3 weeks. Just absolutely insane performances from Jerick McKinnon. He finishes 20.1 fantasy points. Just Patrick Mahomes' favorite target right now. He is the leading receiver over those games, over those past 3 games, even more so than Travis Kelce. Just the way that they scheme him open, the way they work him into the flat, and the way he has found juice after the catch has been incredible. So Jerick McKinnon, bravo for the Chiefs for unlocking him as he embarks on his 3rd NFL team. And finally, Trey McBride. Want to highlight him here. Not a fantastic game by any means, but from tight end positions, scoring 17.3 points. Gotta shout out Trey McBride. He was the number 1 overall tight end in this past class. And he wanted to go to the Arizona Cardinals and a team that were like, what are they doing? They have Zach Ertz. They just signed Zach Ertz this massive 3-year extension. They have DeAndre Hopkins. They just traded for Marquise Brown the day prior during the first round of the draft. Rondale Moore was the second round draft pick the year previous. They have so many offensive weapons. He's going to get lost in the sauce there. And I don't know how well this will actually translate to next year. Again, this is not with Kyler Murray. So Kyler Murray will be back at some point. David Blau is not obviously the answer at quarterback for the Cardinals. And the biggest question is, will this coaching staff be back? Will Cliff Kingsbury be back? Will Steve Keim be back? We really don't know, and I'm leaning towards no at this point. So Trey McBride, this is great to see that he's actually he is talented. He's the guy that we thought he is, but his utilization. There's so many questions around the Cardinals organization at this point. I don't know how much faith I have in him going forward. So those are a lot of studs, a lot of guys that won you your championships. How about the guys that lost you that championship? So going into our duds. Number 1's got to be highlighted as Justin Jefferson. It was a horrible game all around for the Vikings. Justin Jefferson, 2 points. Dalvin Cook was abysmal with 5.4 points. Kirk Cousins had 8 points or something ridiculous. It was just a game that quickly got out of hand. First, you have the kickoff return for a touchdown by Keyshawn Nixon, and then you have the pick 6, and then you have that. I believe it was the passing touchdown to Robert Tonyan for the 3rd one, and it got to 21-3 very, very quickly, and they just kept digging themselves into a bigger and bigger hole, and this is why their offense is just such a liability. And they were honestly sitting all their starters by the start of the 4th quarter. We didn't see Justin Jefferson come back out after the 3rd quarter wrapped up. He had 1 catch for 1.5 yards, and I guess all the talking that Jair Alexander did, guess he was right. Guess that first game was a fluke, but obviously he was a huge focal point of Jair, who is a great cornerback in his own right, and the defense there in Green Bay to absolutely shut him down, and they did their job. He didn't have 0 production. Number 2, DK Metcalf was 0.8 points. Really, really frustrating, especially in a game that, the Seahawks actually played well. They put up 24 points, but it was just a game that got out of hand quickly. It was a Jets team that has been floundering for the past few games. Mike White was absolutely atrocious at quarterback. If you started him, I am so freaking sorry. But it became, started out with that Geno Smith pass to one of their backup tight ends, got him a touchdown, and then basically didn't look back. The Jets only scored 6 points total in the game, and it became a very, very a Kenneth Walker heavy game to kind of round it out. A lot of running, a lot of short passes, a lot of clock control, and just DK Metcalf was not really needed to win the game. So obviously, as a focal point of this offense of a high-powered high-powered Seahawks offense, very, very disappointing in comes fantasy weekend. Saquon Barkley, 6.3 points. And you look at how many points the Giants scored, it's 38 points. How does Saquon Barkley only finish with 6.3 points? Well, it's because he didn't get any of the end zone work. Daniel Jones had those 2 rushing touchdowns, 1 for 10 yards, 1 for 18 yards. He had 2 end zone passes, 1 to Darius Slayton, 1 to Isaiah Hodgins. And by the time it got so out of hand, another game kind of opposite of what we're talking about with the Vikings, but it got so out of hand that they just threw in Matt Breida. There's no reason with Saquon's health in history. And I'm sure Saquon wasn't, he doesn't care about fantasy. He cares about real life. He cares about his health. With his injury history, I'm sure he was happy to let Matt Breida go out and just run out the clock for them. But that's just kind of the way the game script went. It was a atrocious Colts team that they played, and they just didn't need Saquon to really deliver that hard-hitting performance that he always does, as the game was a blowout, and obviously switched over to their backups very, very quickly. Christian Watson, only 1.6 fantasy points, absolutely devastating for a guy that, was almost a lock for a touchdown every single week in, week out. But again, kind of counter, you can have a bad game for a wide receiver on the losing side of a blowout. You can also have a bad game for a wide receiver on the winning side of a blowout. Once you're in that blowout aspect, you're not trying to push the ball down the field. You're not trying to get your wide receivers involved. Obviously, they gave him a couple passes. He dropped one. Yikes for Christian Watson there. But obviously, the whole facet was to run the ball with Aaron Jones, run the ball with Peyton Taylor, and run the ball with A.J. Dillon. Just bleed clock and let it kind of wash out and win the game. There was no need to risk a guy, especially with the hip injury that Christian Watson had. He was on a snap count coming into this game, and if you're already winning, why bother risking injury anymore? Trevor Lawrence, last but not least, 4.48 points. Gosh, a guy who had been playing so well for fantasy up until this point was basically a lock for a lot of people's lineups, and I know a lot of people lost their championships because of it. I know one guy in our Dynasty League had both Justin Jefferson and Trevor Lawrence on his starting squad, and it was absolutely atrocious, to say the very least. But Trevor Lawrence, it was a game against the Texans. Again, they're so bad. It was the question that we actually talked about in our week preview was like, listen, this is a team that only allowed had allowed two quarterback performances over 20 points. One was Matt Ryan in week 1, and the second was Patrick Mahomes. But even these other high-tier quarterbacks that went against them, they weren't putting up any fantasy points because the games were such blowouts, because their run defense is so bad that it got to the point where it's like we're throwing in our backups and just running the ball. There's no need to utilize our offensive weapons. No need to use the pass game. No need to use our quarterbacks. That's what happened. Every single one of the Jaguars running backs got a touchdown from Travis Etienne to JaMychal Hasty to even Snoop Connor finding the end zone. So Trevor Lawrence just wasn't relied upon, and they managed the run game efficiently. Doug Peterson loves the run game, and they just absolutely crushed their spirits that way, and Trevor Lawrence didn't have to play well at all, really, to win this game. And obviously, because the game was essentially meaningless, because they have a do-or-die game to get in the playoffs against the Titans this coming week, again, was pulled early, didn't really need to have any utilization there. Honorable mentions, Miles Sanders. Again, this is a Saints defense that, wasn't given a ton of credit, but they were good. Cam Hayward has come back. Obviously, Marshawn Lattimore came back. Not Cam Hayward. Cameron Jordan was the guy I was thinking of. Cameron Jordan, Marshawn Lattimore both played really, really well. And even though for a really bad team like the Saints, they do have a sneaky good defense, really good run defense, and Miles Sanders was absolutely quashed. And again, once they got down, Gardner Minshew kept trying to throw the ball, and Miles Sanders kind of phased out of the game script there. Garrett Wilson, 3.3 points. Just couldn't get anything going from the offensive pass game. Mike White was absolutely atrocious under center, so the Jets have a lot of questions to answer when it comes to quarterback position this offseason. Deontay Johnson, only 4.5 points. This dude has been awful all year, an absolute bust of a player if you took him in the 4th or the 5th round. Just no consistent production whatsoever, an absolute dud. You should not have been starting him in this game. Terry McLaurin, 4.7 points. Carson Wentz is a liability. That's really all I have to say here. But again, a game in which it got really out of hand against the Buccaneers really early. And Carson Wentz just turned the ball over 3 times, couldn't find any of his wide receivers. It was just a really bad day all around for the Commanders. Juju Smith-Schuster, another time he finds himself on the dead list with only 3.1 points this week. Again, with Jerick McKinnon emerging as the primary pass catcher in that offense, Juju's role in this offense has been phased out. That's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. They spread the ball around so much. I believe Patrick Mahomes had 10 different receivers or 10 different guys catch the ball in this past game. So it's just hard for a guy like a Juju or Travis Kelce to put up these monster numbers if the passing pie is spread so thin. Dalvin Cook, obviously, pulled before the end of the game, down early, wasn't really good for the rushing game or the game script whatsoever. Christian Kirk, obviously in the same vein as Trevor Lawrence, they got up so quickly, so fast that they didn't need to pass the ball. Obviously, just running out the clock, running the ball. JaMychal Hasty, Snoop Connor. Again, Christian Kirk just not needed. Jalen Waddle had a bad game as well, 6.7 points. And again, when two is under center, we see Jalen have a fantastic game, just absolutely blows it out of the park. But, once Skylar Thompson comes in, it seems like his real... He likes to dump off to the running backs. He likes to dump off to Raheem Mostert. He likes to scramble, and then he loves to check it at the knees of Mike Gesicki. Jalen Waddle is not targeted. I think he's only targeted once when Skylar Thompson came in the game. Just this Dolphins offense looks absolutely terrible without Tua under center. Jahan Dotson, copy-paste Terry McLaurin, Carson Wentz is a liability. Ramondre Stevenson, 6.1 points, an absolute devastating game against, a pretty bad Dolphins run defense. But I'm trying to explain why he had a bad game, but I just can't. It's just maybe he's still injured, but they did bring in Damian Harris. They came back to a true 50-50 backfield. He was utilized a lot more. Leonard Fournette, this is the Mike Evans effect. He was utilized. Leonard was not. So Leonard comes off with a bad game of 6.7 points. Zay Jones, copy pasta, Kirk Cousins, excellent talent. Bright future in Jacksonville, was not needed from the past because of how abysmal the run defense is for Houston Texans. David Montgomery, again, a game that, it should have been really good for the running game for the Lions. And sorry, not the Lions. They were playing the Lions, and the Bears. Should have been good for them. Should have been good for Justin Fields. However, looks like, after a week off last week against the Panthers, the run defense actually came back to play. Justin Houston and Aiden Hutchinson came to play for the Lions. And also, I guess it helps that no Darnell Mooney. Chase Claypool is an absolute liability. Cole Kmet couldn't get anything done. So there really was no pass option to really speak of for the Bears, in kind of the same way that the Bills sold out to stop the run last week. The Lions sold out to stop the run this week, and it worked. Absolutely hindering both Justin Fields and David Montgomery's performances. Obviously, Tyler Lockett, I'm throwing him in here. I mean, he missed 1 week with a broken finger. It was crazy to think he would come back and actually play really well with that hand injury. It finishes with 2.5 points, which is more than I honestly thought he would be. I thought he'd be like primarily decoy with 0 targets. But I mean, good for him coming back. But like, if you're playing him, that was just a really, really, really bad call to play a guy who's been 1 week removed from a broken finger. So that's going to wrap up the duds. There's no waivers to pick up because season is over. So what we're going to talk about here is, what do we do with the channel now? What is going to be the plan going forward? First and foremost, I plan to continue my partnership with Sleeper. I think that's been incredible. Nothing but respect for the team over at Sleeper. They have been absolutely incredible. I love working with them. I love putting out videos, and I really actually do hope as we go forward in the next season that we can actually expand our partnership and I can do a lot more content with them, a lot more co-branded content. I think it should be very, very cool. But apart from that, apart from the Sleeper aspect of it, what do I want to do in the off season? A lot of this is going to be self-reflection. As we know, growth. This is a New Year's time, New Year's resolutions is time to look inward and see how we can go. So where was I right? A lot of self-evaluations, going back to a lot of my preseason content. Where was I right? Where was I wrong? Was my process flawed? Was something else flawed? How can I improve? How can I make my takes more accurate? How can I improve the way I analyze players, and how can I bring better content to you guys? So a lot of that's going to be, internally, off camera, and then some that's actually going to be on camera, where I go back and look at some of those earlier videos and some of my earlier tweets and say, okay, cool, this is what I tweeted. I was right, XYZ. I was wrong, XYZ, and this is how I should have addressed this going forward. Obviously, bowl season is now... bowl season is about to wrap up this coming week, and then obviously after that will be the NFL playoffs, and after that we will dive into draft content. I'm a big fan of the NFL draft. I do follow it very closely, so I will be doing quite a bit of NFL draft content here because it parlays into Dynasty fantasy football, which I'm a huge fan of. I do commission a Dynasty Fantasy Football League. I'm very involved in the Dynasty world, so I do like to put a lot of Dynasty content. We'll be talking about Dynasty buys, Dynasty sells, who I think is as off-season moves happen, who's trending upwards, who's trending downwards. Obviously, how does the NFL draft impact Dynasty? Because that's the biggest impact on Dynasty. We'll do some rookie drafts after the actual NFL draft happens. So NFL draft content, and then that'll parlay very, very nicely into Dynasty content. And I think, we'll do Dynasty content for the month of June. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more infrequent uploads here, just because there's a lot less content to talk about. I'm not going to come on here and just spew nonsense every single day, just trying to gouge the bottom of the barrel for content. I don't think that's really what this channel thrives on. It thrives on informed, content that is going to be actually beneficial. So when a video pops up, I hope that you see, oh, I'm actually going to need to listen to this one. So maybe like one video a week up until we kind of start preparing for the draft. So yeah, and obviously as things develop, as this channel grows, this is a really, really successful first year in my opinion. As the partnership with Sleeper grows, we'll keep you guys updated on that, where we'll be on Twitter. Always go check out @TwinTakesFF on Twitter, engage with me there. And again, I've really enjoyed this ride, and I can't wait to continue doing this. And I will see you guys so very soon after a quick break. Got to recover from all the emotional turmoil of the year, right? So, hope you guys won your championships. Hope you guys had another fun season of 2022 football into the 2023 season, and enjoy the fantasy playoffs. And I will see you around.